Gill Button's Dora from 2025 emerges as a quiet, psychologically charged encounter, less a portrait than a suspended moment of interior life. The mood is one of hushed introspection, tinged with a fragile melancholy. The figure seems caught between presence and disappearance, as though remembered rather than directly observed. There is a cinematic stillness here, evoking the afterimage of a face glimpsed fleetingly, imbued with both allure and emotional distance. Button's technique reinforces this ambiguity. Working in oil and acrylic on linen, she employs a fluid, gestural handling that softens contours and dissolves detail into atmosphere. The brushwork feels instinctive rather than descriptive, as forms emerge through washes and veils of pigment rather than precise delineation. This creates a tension between figuration and abstraction, where the identity of Dora is suggested but never fully fixed. Her practice often transforms media-sourced or imagined faces into something more intimate and subjective, layering personal emotion over collective imagery. The emotional effect is subtle but persistent. We get a sense of longing, perhaps even the vulnerability of being seen. The painting resists narrative closure, instead offering a meditative space where memory, desire, and identity blur into one another, leaving the viewer with the impression of having encountered not just a person, but a fleeting state of feeling. The painting, Flowers in Her Hair, Magic Secrets in Her Eyes, completed in 2025, unfolds like a fleeting reverie, an image suspended between innocence and enigma. The mood is quietly luminous, imbued with a soft, almost dreamlike romanticism. The floral motif suggests youth, nature, and adornment, yet it resists sentimentality. Instead, it carries a subtle tension, as though the subject harbors an interior life that remains just out of reach. The magic implied in the title feels less fantastical than psychological, an inward gaze that hints at secrecy, introspection, and a delicate self-containment. Technically, Gill Button continues her signature interplay between figuration and dissolution. Executed in oil and acrylic on linen, the work relies on fluid, translucent layers that allow the figure to emerge gradually from the surface rather than being crisply defined. Edges soften, colors bleed into one another, and facial features hover on the verge of disappearance. This painterly ambiguity evokes the aesthetics of watercolor-like diffusion, where form is suggested through tonal shifts rather than line, reinforcing the painting's ethereal quality. The emotional resonance lies in this tension. The subject appears adorned and outwardly serene, yet internally opaque. The artist captures not a fixed identity, but a fleeting psychological state, one that feels both intimate and elusive, like a memory that cannot fully be held. The artist's work, Haze, completed in 2019, is less a portrait than a state of mind, an image suspended in the fragile threshold between wakefulness and withdrawal. The mood is unmistakably introspective, carrying a muted sorrow that feels both personal and diffuse. The figure appears distant, almost receding into atmosphere, as if consciousness itself were thinning. There is a palpable sense of emotional drift, not despair exactly, but a quiet detachment, like a mind turned inward and slightly out of reach. This aligns with the broader emotional tenor of the series, shaped by loss and memory, where subjects often feel a little bit vacant, a little bit distant, inhabiting a liminal, half-awake state. Technically, Button's approach reinforces this dissolving presence. Working in oil on linen, she allows the medium to behave with a degree of autonomy, where paint is tipped, pooled, and guided, rather than strictly controlled, creating soft transitions and blurred contours. Her brushwork is fluid and instinctive, merging figure and ground, so that identity seems to emerge and evaporate simultaneously. The close-cropped composition intensifies the psychological intimacy, while the lack of sharp delineation produces a vaporous, almost cinematic haze. The result is a portrait that resists fixity. There is a fleeting emotional condition rendered through equally transient painterly means, where form, like feeling, is never fully held. The work, Silence from 2019, operates as a distilled psychological pause, an image that feels less like a portrait and more like the residue of a thought. The mood is deeply interior, suspended in a fragile stillness that borders on emotional withdrawal. The figure appears present yet inaccessible, as though absorbed in a private reverie that resists articulation. There is a quiet tension here, not dramatic but persistent, with an atmosphere of contemplation tinged with loneliness, where silence becomes not absence, but a dense, almost palpable, emotional space. This effect is inseparable from Button's technique. Painted in oil on linen, the work aligns with her broader practice of intuitive, gestural portraiture, where likeness is secondary to emotional excavation. Forms are softened and partially dissolved through thin, fluid layers of paint, allowing edges to blur into the surrounding ground. The brushwork feels both controlled and relinquished, guided yet open to chance, so that the face seems to emerge and recede simultaneously. Rather than defining structure through line, Button builds presence through tonal shifts and atmospheric veils, creating a sense of instability in the image. The result is a portrait that withholds as much as it reveals. Silence becomes an emotional condition, a moment of inward retreat, where identity is not fixed but quietly dissolving into feeling. Transient Melody, completed in 2024, feels like an image in the act of vanishing, an evocation of memory just as it slips from grasp. The mood is delicately ephemeral, imbued with a quiet lyricism that hovers between tenderness and loss. The figure appears less as a stable subject than as a fleeting sensation, as if carried on the fading echo of a song. There is a soft melancholy here, but it is not heavy. Rather, it drifts, suggesting the emotional afterglow of something once vivid, now dissolving into recollection. As with the earlier paintings we discussed, this sense of impermanence is deeply tied to Button's technique. Working in oil and acrylic on linen, she employs a fluid, gestural approach that allows forms to emerge and dissipate simultaneously. Paint is handled with looseness and restraint. Edges blur, tones bleed, and facial features seem suspended in a state of partial formation. Rather than constructing the image through line, she builds it through atmosphere with thin washes and layered veils that create a visual rhythm akin to musical phrasing. The result is a portrait that resists fixity. Like a melody that lingers only in fragments, the figure exists in transition, never fully present and yet never entirely gone. Button captures not identity, but duration itself, a brief emotional resonance stretched across the fragile surface of paint.